The Punjab Sahib story is not part of the original Janam Sakhis. In fact, the Punjab Sahib story is not even part of Janam Sakhi. It's not part of any Janam Sakhi. So this story actually became popular during earlier colonial period.
Hey, it's Ramblings of a Sikh here with episode 30 of the Soldier Podcast. Today, our special guest is Haroon Khalid, author of Walking with Nanak, a book in two parts. First, a fictional account that attempts to narrate the journey of Guru Nanak, and the second looking at the institutionalization of the Sikh religion after Guru Nanak. If you're new here, please make sure to like, comment and subscribe as it goes a lot further than you can imagine. Also, make sure to watch this to the end as we really get to grips with Haroon's book, as well as uncovering some of the really interesting stories, histories and places regarding Guru Nanak Dev Ji. One last thing, during recording with Haroon, my normal primary angle camera, the one that I'm talking through now, corrupted. As a result, I've had to use my side-on angle camera throughout the bulk of the podcast. It doesn't make much of a difference, but I thought it would make sense to explain it. Otherwise than that, let's get into the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be on this wonderful platform.
What we like to start with is getting to know a little bit about yourself, your family history. I guess in a nutshell, who is Haroon Khalid?
Right, thank you. So my name is Haroon. I was born in Pakistan, Punjab, Pakistan, Surwada to be more specific, but I grew up in Lahore, and Punjabi identity is a very important part of my identity. Besides that, I have an academic background in anthropology, and I've been doing freelance journalism since 2008. So that's the time that I graduated, and Walking with Nanak is my third book.
What was it like growing up in Pakistan, in Punjab?
Yeah, no, so Pakistani Punjab, I feel like it's quite complicated in terms of Punjabi identity, because unlike Indian Punjab, Pakistani Punjab is politically the most dominant province, and it enjoys the most sort of political, economic, bureaucratic power, and it also completely associates with the Pakistani identity. So it's in many ways it is sort of representative of what Pakistani identity needs to be, which of course is connected to Urdu and a particular understanding of Islam and so on and so forth. So what that means is that the ethnic identity, the cultural identity of Punjab is almost marginalized. So the Punjab that I grew up in, for example, is not a proud Punjab, and by that I mean it's not a proud Punjab in terms of its language, in terms of its culture. So there's always a looking down upon Punjabi. So for example, my parents never spoke Punjabi with me. So they speak to each other in Punjabi, but they never spoke Punjabi to me because the idea was that somehow this is not a good enough language to be taught to your young children. So I had to learn Punjabi. I mean, I could understand because everybody around me was speaking Punjabi all the time, but I had to learn how to speak after I graduated. So with Iqbal Kaisi, I mean, he forced me to practice. And I'm still very shy and sort of very uncomfortable speaking in Punjabi because I didn't grow up with that language. So there is almost this embarrassment about Punjabi, and you see that tension. So it's really, really interesting that there's almost this contradiction, whereas Punjab, on one hand, is very powerful, economically, politically, but then there's also this marginalized cultural aspect of Punjab. And that is pretty unique to Punjab compared to all the other provinces.
So is there like an overarching culture that essentially subdues whatever culture there is in Punjab?
Yeah, see, so I mean, what I sort of think, and my partner Anam Sakri has done a lot of work on this, is essentially how when states construct these certain narratives over time, what happens is that those narratives sort of seep through into people's imagination as well. Her work is more focused on partition and other sort of narratives, but you can make that argument in terms of religion as well. So the Pakistani state, for example, is not a neutral space. No state occupies a neutral space. And the Pakistani state has a particular understanding of Islam. And that's a choice. It's a political choice about what kind of Islam, what kind of thinkers and philosophers do you celebrate as Muslim scholars? And what kind of scholars do you marginalize in the process? So one small example of that would be, I'm working on Waris Shah, for example, right now. And Waris Shah was alive at a time when Shah Waliullah Delhi was also alive. And they had sort of a complete opposite understanding of what Islam is. Waris Shah himself was rooted in the Muslim culture. I don't think of himself as outside of Islam. He was rooted in a Muslim Sufi culture, but his understanding of that, of course, is very different than Shah Waliullah. The Pakistani state has, over the years, has completely marginalized Waris Shah, whereas Shah Waliullah Delvi is taught in school curriculum. So that's the point that I'm making. So they made a political choice. It's a conscious choice of what kind of Islam are we preaching. So what is happening over the years is that the more the state grows in terms of its power, the more the state sort of grows in terms of its age, the interpretation that the state gives is over time internalized within the people. So what you see now in Pakistan is this, or especially in Punjab, are these pockets of sort of resistance, but I won't even call them resistance because they're just like remnants almost. These sort of surviving bits and pieces of a culture that is very systematically being challenged and being sort of destroyed.
Thank you for that. You mentioned that you've wrote 2 previous books. Do you mind just expanding on what they explore?
Sure. So my first book is called A White Trail, and this is essentially a travel log. So actually so far I've written Walking with Nanak is the only book which is like partly travel log. So travel log is something that I was that's the genre that I was writing in. So my latest book is not a travel log, but that's sort of the theme that I've followed. So my first book, A White Trail, is a travel log through religious minority festivals in Pakistan. So I've attended, let's say, Baisakhi and Diwali and Christmas at different religious sites. And along with that, I've done extensive interviews with members of minorities, not just at these festivals, but also on other occasions. And using those travel logs, using those sort of moments of those festivals, I've talked about a larger social, political, economic situation, like a lived experience, like what does it mean to be a Hindu or a Sikh in Pakistan? So it's an ethnographic sort of study about that, but done through a travel log. So that's my first book. My second book is called In Search of Shiva, and this is about quote-unquote idiosyncratic Sufi shrines in Pakistan. So here you have, this book is sort of like a documentation or a collection of these shrines or Islamic religious practices that we don't usually associate with Islam. So these are shrines of sacred dogs, for example, shrines of sacred cows, of sacred crows. So a lot of sort of folk religion. That's why it's called In Search of Shiva, because I've used Shiva as a symbol of folk religion. And because even within Hinduism, there's a whole debate how Shiva sort of represents a very different kind of deity and a religious practice compared to the other Brahmanical sort of deities. So that's my second book. And third book, of course, is Walking with Nanak.
Wow. Okay. When was the first one published?
My first book was published in 2013. I finished writing it in 11. So it took a couple of years when that came out. The second one came out in 15. But I also had written it a couple of years prior to that. And Walking with Nanak came out in 16.
What was it in particular that sparked your interest to write this book?
The Punjab that I grew up in, so when of course it's slightly different now. I think given Kartarpur Corridor, for example, Guru Nanak is very much part of mainstream conversation in Pakistan. And Sikhism is very much part of mainstream conversation in Pakistan, but it wasn't the case when I was growing up. So there was this understanding, okay, so Sikhism is a religion, nobody really knew what it was, it really wasn't part of the discourse. Guru Nanak, vaguely, yes, there was a couple of Iqbal verses that mention Guru Nanak. I mean, for me, there was absolutely no conscious conversation about Guru Nanak growing up. But I feel like somehow, and this is where we get into some of sort of spiritual aspect of it, or metaphysical aspect of it. I feel like perhaps due to me being Punjabi, there was this sort of unconscious awareness of who Guru Nanak is. So growing up, though, there was this sort of yearning to understand who Guru Nanak is and what Sikhism is, because it's so rooted in Punjab, but there was sort of no avenue. There was no, in my university, for example, there was no course offered, and now it is. So things have changed since the past 15 years. For me, the idea was that Guru Nanak is such an important part of Pakistan and Punjab and this land. So for me, the idea was that I need to learn more about myself. I need to learn more about my culture and my history. And this is a question, of course, that also sort of is asked, the idea that how can a Pakistani Muslim be interested in Guru Nanak? For me, the idea is not that I am interested in somebody else's, other's history. This is part of my own history, my own heritage. I think of Guru Nanak as part of my own legacy.
Oh, I love that. At the start of your book, you comment on the impact of hearing the Babur Bani from your mentor, Iqbal Ghaser. Do you mind just kind of expanding on what was that experience?
Yeah, and I think that example, for me, for example, so usually when we think of religious saints and scholars and philosophers and prophets. Like because we grow up with all these stories and we grew up with these certain figures, that they acquire these larger than life sort of personalities, and we sort of in that process, what we do is we de-politicize them, we decontextualize people, we historicize them. So these saints, for example, and that's true for Bullish Ivan. That's true for that's true for Buddha. That's true for all sort of big saints, philosophers. That they were part of a particular context, and they were deeply political. And I think what really sort of took me by surprise about Babur Bani was how political it is. And you don't think of Guru Nanak as a political figure. Like, that's not the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Guru Nanak. But here he is, like, challenging the most powerful political force of that time. And there's a whole class element in it as well. So he was like deeply political. I think that really sort of took me by surprise. That I had this perception of who Guru Nanak is, this religious scholar, this cut off from society and not engaged with it. But then Babur Bani really brings you back and jolts you and tells you, no, that here is a figure who's very political, who's very engaged with the society. I think also how he was referring to the Almighty, the deity in Babur Bani, really sort of resonated with me. Like, there was almost this sarcasm, the idea that, hey, that look, like you, under your watch, this is what Babur is doing. And what is your role? What is your responsibility? And of course, it's poetry, so you can really interpret it in multiple ways. But for me, I think those are two things that really resonated with me.
Throughout the book, your mentor features prominently, and kind of the relationship between you and your mentor, you compare to kind of one similar to the Sufi concept of murshad and mureed. Now, what is unique about that relationship that makes it important? And then what role has your mentor played in this book? Because obviously they seem to have been very, very influential.
Yeah, no, and not just this book. I think none of my writings, and even my articles on all my books, would have not been possible if I had not met Iqbal Kaisar. Perhaps I would have done writing, but in a very different form, and I don't think in this manner. So I think because within the Pakistani education system, like, you hardly talk about non-Muslim history, non-Muslim heritage, and you also talk about history, and I think that's probably true for India as well, where you talk about history from a larger macro perspective. You don't talk about little geographical regions that sort of are part of your conscious of spatial awareness. And what Iqbal Kaisar did for me was open up that world, firstly, of non-Muslim history and heritage of Pakistan, but also about the geography. Like, we would be driving around the city and he'd be like, oh, so this village is this many years old, and this is what happened here. This is Babur came here and rested here, or Guru Nanak came here and rested here. And that's not part of much sort of mainstream history as part of books. So I think that world sort of opened up for me, and I was just sort of blown away. And still am. Like, so that, I think, for me, my first article, for example, that I ever wrote was about this Hindu temple that was being destroyed, and it's quite close to my home. And I've discovered that temple through Iqbal Kaisar, through his sort of, and the entire history that I know about that temple came from his research. So I think at least for my first 30, 40 articles that I wrote were almost written by him. I was just sort of writing, I was the pen. So I owe everything to him. So in terms of my writing career, like, I owe everything to him. So that it's not just Walking with Nanak. I think even till my last book, Imagining Lahore, like, heavily inspired by his work. And even with Varis Shah that I'm talking, like, so my first sort of interaction with Varis Shah also happens through him. So that is a very, very important relationship, and I really wanted to pay homage to it, because I was like, so I need to sort of, I needed to sort of express that, I think, and that's where his relationship and my relationship becomes such an important part of the story of Walking with Nanak. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it was that, so within the Sufi mystical tradition, and that's not just true for Sufi, but within the mystical tradition, of which Guru Nanak is also part of, the murshad and the mureed, the master and the disciple, is a very, very important relationship. And a lot of times that relationship is expressed in a very erotic language, in a very erotic sort of, so the idea of love and bride and groom. And to your modern sensibilities, it takes you a while to wrap your head around it, because we live in a very different world. So, a lot of times we pick up these Sufis as LGBTQ symbols, which I also feel like, I'm not sure if that makes a lot of sense, because different sensibilities, different time period, different categories. I mean, they can as political symbols, but intellectually, academically, I'm not sure if there is that clear cut of an overlap. So I wanted to understand that relationship as well, and I feel like the only way I could understand that was, so for example, I think of Mardana and Guru Nanak as disciple and master, and throughout Guru Nanak's poetry, you also see where so a lot of his teaching is directed towards Mardana, and Mardana becomes the symbol of a disciple, of the world itself. And Mardana needs to learn, and Guru Nanak is the master. And there's a lot of emphasis in his teachings about getting a master, about getting a spiritual guru, which is of course part of the larger mystical tradition. So for me, I think the only way I could understand that relationship was through my own relationship with Iqbal Kaise. So in many ways, even though he's not a Sufi, I'm not his disciple, there is no formal relationship in that way, but in many ways it is this one-on-one teacher-student relationship, and we do share a very special bond, a very spiritual bond. He calls me his spiritual son, I call him my spiritual father. So there is this sort of relationship that we have, and I feel like to really sort of wrap my head around it, given my modern sensibilities, that could have only happened if sort of I personalized it, and that's the way I tried understanding Nanak's and Pradhana's relationship.
Just then dealing with the actual contents of the book, like how did you go about your research?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, so Guru Nanak's part is completely fictionalized, and that's something I've acknowledged throughout the book. I mean, I don't even have to acknowledge, like it is fiction. It is, so it's not meant to be historical. And of course, I've also acknowledged the fact that this is my understanding of who Guru Nanak is, which is very subjective. I mean, anybody else can have completely disagree, and that's I'm sure Guru Nanak will be okay with that. There's different components of research to this book. So one was, of course, physical, like going and physically visiting those gurdwaras, those places where these stories come from. So there was a physical sort of travel log that went. And I think a part of sort of unacknowledged research, and once again, it doesn't really conform to the modern understanding of research, but can sort of overlaps with physical, with sort of spiritual and metaphysical, is the spiritual aspect of the research. The idea that how, in the process of research, what is happening for you? So what does the travel mean for you? So travel almost becomes symbolic of a larger sort of understanding and learning. I mean, Guru Nanak himself was a traveler. And I think that is something I really wanted to talk about, because by this time, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, that I thought of myself as a travel writer primarily. So travel was something which was very, very sort of important for me, and I thought of Nanak as a traveler as well. So what does the journey of travel mean? What are the kind of conversations that happen on travel? So I was really open to that experience as well. So travel itself being part of the research, and what you experience internally, and what you see and what you observe, which is not necessarily research, but it's sort of still part of your research and writing. So that was a very important component. And of course, to understand Sikh history, then I had to go to books and papers. So that's in other ways, it's very traditional academic research. Even Guru Nanak's poetry and his sort of his biography and his story. So learning that through books, through sort of academic journals, listening to different conversations. So for example, an idea that came to me was, okay, so here is Guru Nanak, who is on one hand challenging institutionalized religion, and then you have the emergence of an institutional religion. So I was like, there's something there that needs to be explored. But I'm like, is that just me, or are there other people talking about it as well? And I was glad to find out that the many Sikh scholars have written about this. And so that kind of research was sort of also engaging with that kind of research. And of course, with Iqbal Kaise, like, essentially just conversing with him. Like, he is an encyclopedia on Punjab history, on Sikh history. So just sort of talking to him, learning more about history, and sort of using that as part of the research as well.
So you make a point in the book that you were particularly, or kind of the theme that comes across is that you're particularly interested in finding out about Guru Nanak aside from the identity of a saint. And I guess you touched upon it slightly earlier on in the podcast. Why were you driven to contextualize Guru Nanak?
Yeah, I mean, these are Guru Nanak included, and other sort of philosophers as well. They are such inspirational figures. Like, their life stories are so inspiring. But what you end up doing is, so if when we end up mythologizing them, we end up sort of making them untouchable figures. What happens is that we lose them. We lose them as human beings who overcame complicated relationships, who overcame complicated situations. And I think that their divinity almost is in their humanity. And that's where the inspiration is. I need to understand, I mean, that is there anything which is relatable with Guru Nanak's struggle that I am struggling with? And if I can find those parallels, that's where I'm inspired. That's where I want to be more like him. And that's an unfortunate thing we do with not just, in fact, philosophers and saint scholars, but even like big historical figures, big political figures. Like we end up sort of making them as these larger than life figures who are not humans, who don't have the same insecurities and weaknesses that we do, who do not operate within the same family structures, economic structures. And that's their beauty, like how they overcame those difficulties, those sort of, and how their humanity is what makes them special. Their ordinariness, in that sense, is what makes them extraordinary, and that's something that I wanted to explore, and that's something that I'm constantly fascinated by, within history and within sort of religious history as well.
Whilst you were doing your research then, was there anything in particular that jumped out to you of particular interest during your travels and your research for the book?
Yeah, I think one thing that really fascinated me was how there was a certain sort of survival of Guru Nanak's legacy in Pakistan. And once again, this is pre-Kartarpur, so Guru Nanak had still not become this major figure that he's become now in Pakistan. He's part of main discourse, but he wasn't at that point. So what I found fascinating was that at certain small Sufi shrines, people still talked about Guru Nanak, and they talked about him in a very respectful manner. So for example, the first chapter looks at this Sufi shrine where the folk story of that shrine is that Guru Nanak's mother came to that shrine and prayed for their first child, and that's how they had their first child. Now, of course, historically, that story can be completely untrue, and which is not the point. The point is not about finding the truth about the story. The point is that here you have a Muslim Sufi shrine in Pakistan that claims Guru Nanak's history and legacy, which itself really shows the important part that Guru Nanak occupies in that geography. And that shrine is very close to Nankana Sahib, so there is a geographical connection there as well. I found that fascinating, and these kind of stories then kept on repeating at multiple shrines. So, for example, in Lahore, I'm forgetting the name, but that's the Gurdwara where Baby Nanki was born. So it's on Bediyan Road. So there I was told that there's a local Sufi shrine that also claims that Guru Nanak once visited them, and they have some sort of heritage of Guru Nanak. Once again, true or not the point. The point is that Sufi shrine is sort of carrying forward that tradition. Similarly, in Sialkot, I saw how there was a Gurdwara Beri Sahib, which is a very popular Gurdwara with Guru Nanak, had over time become a Sufi shrine, and I felt like that was a way of local people paying homage to the sacredness of that space. And that space was sacred because it was associated with Guru Nanak. So these kind of stories were really heartwarming for me. And of course, there are also all these other stories where Gurdwaras are completely neglected and they're destroyed. And perhaps they are more so in majority. But for me, these, and that's what you expect. So that doesn't surprise. But these stories were the ones that really were heart, touching, and felt like this is the kind of Punjab that I associate with, and I wish that this is perhaps true legacy of Punjab in many ways.
What do you think then that these shrines and the places you visited, what do you think that they say about the culture of Punjab before partition and before a time where religious boundaries were so entrenched and demarcated? What do you think these physical spaces say to you about that type of, or that previous type of culture?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So there was this Punjabiyat, and I wouldn't say, I'll be skeptical of saying that this is something which is unique to Punjab. I think it was part of many South Asian traditions. You have that in Kashmir, in Sindh, in other parts of India as well. But the idea that religion was a little more fluid. And I feel like at some level, for example, Varis Shah's poetry or Bulleh Shah's poetry, and even Guru Nanak's sort of poetry, really captures that essence beautifully. So, for example, Varis Shah, on one hand, refers to Ranja, who's a Muslim figure, and he's a symbol of deity as Krishna. And he's constantly playing with that theme, and so does Bulleh Shah, right? And Guru Nanak, and they're sort of carrying forward Guru Nanak's legacy. And I feel like, they are popular figures. They are not the anomalies. They are the norm. That is what religion was at that point. So it was not, I mean, Guru Nanak, for example, within Sikhism, the importance of Baba Farid is pivotal. I was surprised when I went to Nankana Sahib for the first time. There's a picture of Baba Farid at the entrance. Before there was a picture of Guru Nanak. And once you read Guru Nanak's sort of history, you understand what an important role Baba Farid played in his understanding of monotheism and so on and so forth. So for many Sikhs, going to Pakpatan was a sacred thing. And if borders sort of, and if there was more travel between India and Pakistan, and Baba Farid's shrine would have become a huge pilgrimage site. And there is still a demand for it, by the way, by Sikh expats who want Pakpatan to be also part of that legacy. And you also see that, so for example, I did some research on Kirtan performers before partition, and the whole legacy is of Muslims. These were Muslim Mirasi families who used to perform Kirtan at multiple Sikh Gurdwaras before partition. So this is such a deep sort of so these boundaries between different religions of course didn't really exist, and you still find a lot of that legacy in contemporary Punjab and in other parts of South Asia as well. I think with British colonial institutions, it was very systematically destroyed. I think that's, so for me, more than partition itself, I don't think partition is the root cause of the problem. In fact, partition is in many ways, and the kind of partition that we had, partition is a product of that systemic understanding of institutional, how they defined Sikhism, how they defined Islam, how they defined Hinduism. And over time, because they were the power, they were the state, those identities were eventually, that their identity, what the state was telling you about your religion, etc., was over time being internalized by people. And today we understand that, we defend those boundaries.
So my question then, just kind of off the back of that, so part of, as you've already said, part of your book is actually exploring how Guru Nanak, in his truest sense, is a mystic, and is a mystic who essentially, by default of his spiritual journey, is against institutionalization, is against these forms of structure and hierarchy and everything else that goes with it. So what is it in particular when you refer to institutionalization of religion that you're pointing to? Because as we've just seen, to some, institutionalization comes as a result of things like colonialism and that period of history. But just to be clear to those listening, what is it that you're referring to when you talk about this institutionalization?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually a tough one to answer. So whereas I argue that Guru Nanak, on one hand, challenged institutionalized religion. So I think for me, like, what I mean by that is that he did not support any particular ritual. He challenged all religious rituals. He challenged the idea of God residing in a particular sacred space. So he challenges the idea of pilgrimage. He challenges the idea of a conventional form of prayer. So all of that, and you hear those stories over and over again. And then he keeps on repeating that there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. Because at that point, there is no Sikhism. So the idea was that these two main dominant religions sort of, like, we obsess about these identities so much that we forget that there is a uniformity, there is a certain sort of connection. There are these overlapping sort of spiritual experiences that unite these two religions and more. So for me, I think when I say that Guru Nanak was against institutionalized religion, I mean in terms of pilgrimage, in terms of these rituals. And then over time what happens is that these rituals, these pilgrimage, acquire a greater significance. They become more important than, they're supposed to be a pathway to a certain spiritual experience. But over time they become so important that we forget about the spiritual experience and become obsessive about rituals. And I think that's what Guru Nanak was trying to sort of challenge. The idea was that no, you need to find that spirituality within. And if let's say if a particular ritual helps you do that, that's all right. But that's his message to Mardana, for example. When Mardana asks him that I'm a Muslim and I want to be your follower, what should I do? And he's like, just stay a Muslim, be a good Muslim. So the idea is not to sort of drop all religious identities or to drop all rituals, but to sort of reconnect with the spiritual experience of those rituals, of what those rituals are meant to be. And I think that's sort of, for me, is what I thought. But then having said that, Guru Nanak himself also institutionalized religion. So him settling at Kartarpur, for example, and setting up langar is institutionalization. Him appointing the next disciple is institutionalization of religion. And so, and these are, and I think once again, these are contradictions, but these are beautiful contradictions because that's what makes people humans. And that's what makes people so interesting to sort of, so relatable, that you have these struggles. And then, of course, I'm also thinking about, and this is something that is sort of mentioned in history books, is that, so how does his son feel, who himself is a spiritual figure, and he's sidelined? And then he takes on this extreme form of asceticism, which Guru Nanak actually despises. And then you can almost think about it from a very Freudian sense that, okay, so maybe is he really rebelling against his father and be like, are you saying that no, we will not be ascetics, extreme ascetics, and then I will be an extreme ascetic, and that itself becomes so. What are those family dynamics like when he appoints the first guru? So these are just sort of fascinating human things that make Guru Nanak's story so relatable, so interesting, and so sort of inspiring.
What do the other chapters in the book explore? And in particular, how do they look at the history or the teachings of the other gurus, or is it entirely focused around Guru Nanak Dev Ji?
So the focus is primarily around Guru Nanak, and the idea is that so the book is divided in a way where I go to a particular shrine, which is associated with Guru Nanak. And then there is sort of this fictionalized story of Guru Nanak going to that same place and how that story sort of originated. So looking at Janam Sakhis and those iconic stories and sort of fictionalizing them and trying to sort of making them more relatable and more sort of quote unquote rational in terms of important sensibilities. So these are these two parallel stories where I'm going to those places. So the focus is primarily on Guru Nanak and me trying to understand Guru Nanak. I think the focus is less on the teachings of the Sikh gurus, but more about what Guru Nanak symbolized for the other Sikh gurus. So the importance that Guru Nanak acquires in Sikh iconography is something that I was fascinated about. So how did other Sikh gurus see Guru Nanak? That was the point that I wanted to see, but also to understand if Sikhism, for example, developed and institutionalized over the years, then what were the historical and the political reasons for that happening? So the idea is not to be like, that's not what Guru Nanak said. Of course, history does not work that way. Like it always evolves and changes, right? So what forced Sikh gurus, for example, to take up arms? How were they sort of marginalized by Jahangir and by Aurangzeb, and what happened? And then how does that sort of violence take them back to Guru Nanak? So, for example, I argue that Guru Nanak's interaction with Babur, for example, acquires more of a symbolic importance after Guru Arjan's assassination, after his execution, and then after Guru Tegh Bahadur's execution, because then this conflict between Sikh gurus and Mughal emperors becomes more powerful, more in your face. And then you go back to the roots of both Mughal and Sikh history and be like, you know what, this conflict began with Guru Nanak and Babur. I mean, of course, there's much more historical research that needs to go into that. But that's just my sort of hypothesis to begin with. So that was the idea, to understand when the Sikh gurus were taking particular actions, where were these actions coming from? So understanding the political context. But of course, there are changes that happen after as well. I mean, I think the colonial state and then Sikh Sabha movement, that was not my focus of the story, but to understand where did Sikhism begin with Nanak and how did it end at that point with Guru Gobind Singh.
Throughout the book, you make references to a lot of modern art depictions of the Sikh gurus and in particular Guru Nanak Dev Ji. So what were some of the conclusions that you drew?
It's a great point. And actually, to be honest, like that's not what I was consciously looking into, like the idea of how Guru Nanak is depicted in terms of art. But these are great points. But one thing that comes to my mind is like how when we think of Guru Nanak's image, Bhai Bala and Bhai Mardana are also always there. And we think of Bhai Bala as being one of his other disciples along with Bhai Mardana, but we also know that he actually was not a contemporary of Guru Nanak. Bhai Bala came much later. I think it's like 100, 200 years after Guru Nanak. But now, over time, what that iconography has done is that Bhai Bala is very much part of the same sort of world that Guru Nanak and Bhai Mardana were. So in all realistic image, it was Bhai Mardana and Guru Nanak who were traveling alone, and Bhai Bala, of course, didn't really exist. The stories come much later. What I was also really fascinated was, and wanted to explore a bit, which I talk about very briefly in the book, is is to look at how Guru Nanak is depicted today and then compare that to how all the other Sikh gurus are depicted. And what does that tell you about Guru Nanak? So, for example, what I found fascinating, something I've explored in the book, is that how Guru Nanak is shown as a mystic, as a yogi or a mystic, and he's dressed in that manner, which is very simple. And then you have Guru Gobind Singh, who's depicted as a king, as a regal, and that he really was. So I really wanted to understand, how. So what does that tell us about Guru Nanak and Guru Gobind Singh, and how they're both interpreted, and what connects them, and what sort of differentiates them.
So what was it for you then? What were some of the similarities and differences that you found in that comparison?
See, I mean, so one fundamental difference is that by the time Sikhism or Sikh Guruhood comes to Guru Gobind Singh, it is very much a family affair. It is institutionalized within a particular caste. And it was Guru Gobind Singh becoming a Sikh Guru was almost inevitable by the time that Sikh Guruhood comes to to Guru Gobind Singh, because it had been part of that family for 2 or 4 generations. With Guru Nanak, of course, that's not true. Guru Nanak comes from a spiritual family. They were Vedis, they were reciters of the Vedas. So there's a certain spirituality there. But then he rebels against his family almost, and starts a new spiritual movement. So there is this whole. So whereas Guru Nanak is challenging tradition, Guru Gobind Singh, in many ways, is a product of a certain tradition that his family and the history is part of. I think that's a very important distinction. I think also by the time that Sikh Guruhood comes to Guru Gobind Singh, the political power, the political stakes, the economic power was just so much more different. Being a Sikh Guru meant so many things at that point. It meant a certain political status. It meant a certain economic status. And what that also meant was a certain rivalry with the Mughal state that sort of challenges, and by that, you had to be a warrior. By the time Sikh Guruhood came to Guru Gobind Singh, there was no other option, because a king had to be. And by Guru Nanak, that was not really part of his life. He lived in a very different time. So I think those are a few sort of interesting things that I want to look at. Now I think what happens is, and I sort of play around with that theme in the book, is that when you compare Guru Gobind and Guru Nanak and put them next to each other, it becomes very easy to sort of make these large comparisons and talk about these differences. But what I want to, and that's how I start the book, by talking about the extreme differences. But then what I really wanted to know was that how did Guru Nanak's movement become Guru Gobind's political movement? And for that, you have to really go through the history of what happened and the sort of rivalries that happened within different sects that emerged within Sikhism. I think that itself is something that we don't talk enough about. I think it's such a fascinating story of how every Sikh guru faced opposition from one of the other claimants.
And there were usually opposition from family members.
Of course there were. Guru Nanak's son himself did not approve of Guru Angad Dev.
Although he did have a cordial relation with most of the gurus post, as in, I understand your point, I'm not taking away from that in any way, but just also then pointing to the cordial relation the gurus had after with Baba Siri Chand. So it is definitely interesting, and especially I think your point about how after Guru Angad, but I'm pretty sure Guru Angad Dev Ji onwards, all of the gurus are related in some way or fashion through marriage or blood.
So Guru Angad Dev, Guru Amar Dev was not related. I think after Guru Amar Dev, so Guru Ramdas was Guru Amar Dev's son-in-law.
Yeah, and then from Guru Ramdas Ji onwards, you basically have a blood.
Then it's sons.
Yeah, it's Guru. So Guru Arjan Dev Ji is Guru Ramdas Ji's son. Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji is obviously Guru Arjan Dev Ji's son. Guru Har Rai is then the grandson of Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji. And
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, one of Guru Har Gobind's son challenged Guru Har Rai. With Guru Ramdas, so his son Prithi Chand, that is the most prominent, I think, rebellion. Because they became pretty powerful. In fact, there's this whole theory about how Guru Amar Das's son challenged Guru Ramdas, and I believe Guru Angad Dev's son challenged Guru Amar Das. So I think that's where Guru Amar Das had to change his village and form his gati somewhere else. And I think that's also one reason why Guru Angad Dev had to change he did not sit in Kartarpur. And also we talked a bit about Sikhism, right? In that sense, like before the Sikh Sabha movement, there was still a lot of sort of diversity within that instant in terms of many of these movements were pretty much alive and continue to some extent and were politically important. Like they were more, I think after early colonial experience, like 1920, 1930s is when they sort of become a little more subdued.
In your research then, did you come across anything that you didn't expect?
I'm not sure if that is directly sort of what points to what you're saying, but something that really that pisses off people a bit about my book is the mention of Panja Sahib. The idea that, and that's a very, very important part of Guru Nanak's story, that he stopped a rock with his hand and the Panja. Now, so I sort of write, and I'm using others. And once again, I'm not the first one to make this argument. There's a lot of historical work that's already been done on it. That the Panja Sahib story is not part of the original Janam Sakhis. In fact, the Panja Sahib story is not even part of Janam Sakhi. It's not part of any Janam Sakhi. So this story actually became popular during earlier colonial period. Once again, it was part of the oral history. And over time, because the story is so fascinating and the Gurdwara is so important, that over time the story is seen as part of a very, very integral part of Guru Nanak, but it's not part of any Janam Sakhi. So let's just sort of any historical connection of Guru Nanak is not even there. So I write about how, I've written a whole fictional piece about how that rock was carved by a Muslim stonemason who was trying to save his life from Sikh invasion at that point. And many people get very pissed off. I get a lot of sort of, if there's any hate mail that I get, which is very rare, very, very rare, but that's the hate mail. I also mentioned in that book, in that part, which people of course completely choose to ignore, is that when I put my hand on that rock, it was such a spiritual experience for me. Like I felt like I was holding Guru Nanak's hand. More than any other space, I felt like it was a very, very intimate experience, and it was such a beautiful spiritual experience. So, and that's the whole point. The point is that it doesn't have to be Guru Nanak's hand for me. So even though I know that story is not true, but even when I'm putting my hand on that rock as a pilgrim, it felt like a spiritual experience. I felt like I was holding his hand. So yeah, I think that itself, that's an interesting story for me.
That's beautiful. That's actually beautiful. Just kind of sticking with that then, like, how did the experience influence you?
Yeah. No, I think one thing that I'm really glad about is that this is my third book as opposed to being my first book. So I think the biggest challenge for me while writing this book, well, firstly was as a non-Sikh to fictionalize Guru Nanak. And to even claim things like there are certain contradictions. Like that itself was very scary. And I think I was younger, so perhaps a little more braver and stupider, whatever, I was able to do it. I think also because I was in Pakistan, as opposed to, so if I was, and I knew that, even if there's a backlash, like who cares in Pakistan? Like so that was one of my attitudes. And of course, I think for me, also a challenge was in terms of conceptualizing the book. And that's what I mean, that I would not have been able to do it if this was my first book. Like I needed to grow as a writer to be able to sort of have these 3 or 4 strands, essentially, of fiction, poetry, magical realism working together and somehow bring the story out of it. So in fact, I remember the first person that I showed to was this editor from one of my agents, for my agent actually, and he's like, you know what, it's a great idea, but I don't think Haroon can pull this off because this is too ambitious. And it was, for me at that point, it felt very ambitious. And I think, not the writing process, but just the thinking about it, like that process, like how would I write the story, which is a travel log, but also fiction, and then also talks about history, and how do these 3 genres mix? Like usually the books don't have multiple genres. So how can I have a book which has multiple genres? I think that is then that sort of almost like and then that experiment receiving positive response, I think really helped me, like in terms of my writing, in terms of like really gave me that confidence that this is done very well. And I think what is really heartwarming for me, and I don't think I've still fully comprehend this. Like I think I'm really like a lot of young Sikh readers write to me, and they tell me how that the book has helped them rediscover Guru Nanak and rediscover Sikh heritage, and I just don't even know how to understand that, because I'm like, no, like I cannot be in that place. I cannot even imagine myself to be in that place where I'm able to connect people with their history and their heritage and Guru Nanak. Like, I think that level of flattery, I just reject it. I'm like, no, that's not happening. So I think that itself is just so overwhelming, so touching. The kind of response I received, despite it being not a conventional book about Sikhism or Guru Nanak.
Just then, continuing with yourself, what can we expect in the future?
Yeah, so I just finished a book on Varisha. And this is, I think in many ways that book is like a sequel to Walking with Nanak, but not necessarily, because firstly this Varisha book would have not been possible. So in also in ways like the writing style similar to Walking with Nanak is experimental. It is fictional, but then it's also within fiction is taking on these 2 or 3 different writing styles. So it's a fictional story on Varisha and sort of how he wrote Hiranja, and then how he experienced what he experienced politically, historically, religiously, intimacy, and how did that translate into Hiranja? So I think the book almost helps you read Hiranja in a way. Like that's what the book is. I finished writing it. It's with my editor right now, and he's editing it. So hopefully, maybe perhaps towards the end of this year, the book will be out.
Oh, brilliant. I look forward to that. One last question. This is less serious than any of the other questions that we've had, which is, what is your food heaven and what is your food hell?
Yeah, I think it's so tough. Like eating anything every day would just be so sort of annoying. But I think if I could maybe like either pizza or biryani. Like I can have biryani every day, and I think a food that I will not eat is karele and bhindi. Like just no.
Does it matter? Like, so no matter who cooks it, you just wouldn't touch it?
No, never. Yeah. So recently I went through this period where I'm like, listen, I'm not a child anymore. I should, like, grown ups eat bhindi. I had it once or twice. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. Whatever. Yeah.
Fair. I can't disagree with you on that one. All right. I just wanted to check. I've gone through all of the questions that I had written down. Is there anything in particular that you wanted to go over or to mention, or is there anything that you think that we've missed out?
Yeah, no, I think we had a great conversation. I think I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm okay actually. Yeah.
No problem. I will leave you to the rest of your day. Thank you so much for this.
For sure. Thanks. Take care.
Take care. So you've made it to the end of episode 30 of the Sorts podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Haroon Khalid. Please make sure to like, comment and subscribe, as it goes a lot further than you can imagine. Otherwise than that, I will see you all in the next episode.